Controllers are a core feature of AngularJS, and they give us a way to communicate with our views. In this lecture, we'll wire up our first controller and find out how to make use of it in the view. Okay, so we said that controllers are generally responsible for communicating between the view and the model. And so let's see how we can set up a controller with Angular. And at the same time, we're going to get some more structure going within our application directory. So to get started, we are going to want to create a new directory within our ng classifieds folder that is going to be the place where our components live. So back over here in the terminal, you'll see that we've got our HTTP server running right now. And so we could either stop this by doing Control-C on a Mac, or we could create a new terminal window, and then we can get back into our ng classifieds folder and do our work there. So let's do that. Let's create a new tab, and so that's Command-T on Mac to create that. And we will zoom in a bit here. And we need to get back to that ng classifieds folder on the desktop. So let's change directories there. So CD, and we'll go desktop, and ng classifieds. And what we want to do is create a new directory within here called components. So we'll do mkdir, and we'll call it components. And then let's change into that directory. And what we want next is our controller file. So let's create a new file, and this is called classifieds.ctr for controller.js. And naming convention is something that kind of differs from person to person based on their own opinions of how things should be named in Angular. I like to have a reference somewhere within the file name that tells me what it is exactly. And in this case, I'm using CTR for controller. And we'll see some of the other naming conventions I've got later on. So we'll touch that and should be there. Let's head back over to Sublime to check it out. Right here within components, we've got our controller. All right, so let's get our controller code going here, and I'll just take a second to say that we are going to be using immediately invoked function expressions throughout our JavaScript code in this course. And immediately invoked function expressions, or IIFE, and people pronounce it IFE for short, help us to have lexical scoping for each of the pieces we create. And so we won't get into too much detail about scoping right now, but feel free to read up on it. But essentially what this is going to do is it's going to scope all of our JavaScript to the files we create them in. And by this approach, we won't be polluting the global scope. And the way that we do in IFE is we open a set of parentheses, and then we'll do a function in our brackets, and then we'll call this function right away. So anything that we write in here is going to be contained lexically to this function. We also, as a best practice, want to do use strict. So this does mean that we've got a bit more code to write as we're creating our app, but it is a best practice to code this way. All right, so let's get a reference to our module. And so for that, we'll do Angular, and we'll do .module, and we want our ng classifieds module. And notice here that I'm not putting in that second argument, which we put in last time as an empty array. And that's because if we call module in this way, it's going to give us a reference to the module with this name instead of declaring a new module with that name. If we had that second argument as our empty array, then this would create a new module, which is not what we want right now. We just want to reference the module we've already created. And the way that we create our controller is with the controller method. So we'll come down here and we'll say controller, and we'll call it classifieds CTRL, and that's controller for short. Now anything that we put inside this anonymous function, that is our second argument here, will be our controller code. So we can put anything we want in here, and that will be our controller. The way that we make reference to this controller over within our application is we need to use the ng controller directive. So we say ng controller is equal to classifieds controller. And so what that's done now is it's tied our controller to our view. Everything within here, all of this HTML, this is our view. And then this over here is our controller. So our controller is now tied to our view via this ng controller directive. So we know that controllers are supposed to communicate with views, and how do we make this happen? Well, we need a special object that Angular provides called scope, and we'll talk about that in the next video.